Hey, kids, and welcome to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. That's me. I'm your host, coming at you for July 24th through the 30th, here as I am ever with producer Zoe.
Hello.
Lot going on in your world, Zoe.
Yeah, I'm buying a new car, and it is such a whole new world to learn about.
Oh, interesting. All right. I'll call that a cardinal grand square with the Pluto and the sun and the moon, the nodes of the moon.
Oh yeah, starting up.
Right. Think about it. Like that's a transit that's about moving forward, right? Nodes of the moon means we're moving forward, but it comes with change, conflict, obstacle, and difficulty. This is actually a good thing to be talking about, just for educational purposes for our listeners, right? I am always going to speak of things with great hyperbole because I like big dramatic expression. And so sometimes it can seem like a transit, like a big square like this, that's, where the language is, big. Change and breakdown and challenge and Pluto and, death and rebirth. But these transits can play out in much simpler life on life's terms kind of ways,
Right.
Like in your experience. What's the big conflict, change, death, rebirth experience of your life right now is you need a new car, you're doing some research, it's a little difficult because there's a lot to learn, you want to make the right choice, right? Am I this accurate?
Oh, absolutely. But the cool thing that I think you're getting at is buying a new car is just a thing. At least in LA, you have to do it. So
You have to
it's
have
not
one.
like this. Yeah, it was sad, but to not have the other one and whatever. But it's just a part of life. It's not some just catastrophic
Right,
cross
but it is
thing,
something that you are having to work with
Mm,
in an effortful way, such that your life will flow in the direction of purpose more easily when you're in some wheels.
yeah.
Right? So it's like I sometimes will sit with two different people in a session and they both might have the same Uranus transit and one person's house falls off a cliff and the other person gets like a really bad hangnail. Same transit, but different levels or layers of how they play out.
Mhm.
The square that sort of perfected just as last week was coming to a close actually has some movement and energy this week. I'm not going to go into it in great detail just because we covered it last week and last week's square happened. And what's happening this week is that Pluto is T-squaring the nodes of the moon a couple of different times because of this weird wobble that the nodes do. The nodes, because they're energies that respond to a dynamic system of not only the moon orbiting around the earth, but the two bodies pulling on each other, then the nodes have this little wobbly thing that we can measure as like a day or two in direct motion, a day or two in retrograde motion, a day or two back to direct, then back to retrograde, back to direct, back to retrograde. I think I talked about this last week when I described the true node or the mean node, right? So that's why I don't work with the mean node because I don't need to dumb it down to be, I'm not going to be confused if one day is retrograde and the next day is direct because frankly, you don't need to worry about whether it's retrograde or direct. But it does mean that this week, as much as last week, will feature some conflict-driven need to create change in order to move your life forward more powerfully. And it might be as simple as buying a new car and making sure you make the right choices. So I've got two questions today, partly because two questions came in, and also they're both short enough that I can do both of them in one episode without taking up too much time answering questions. But, I love teaching and I love the questions, kids, so keep them coming. Just send emails to michael@michaellinux.com, and I will read your question and answer it on the podcast. So Bailey writes, "Good morning. I have a question to you related to houses. And comparing my chart to my partner's chart, I notice while my houses are relatively even in size, my partner's 12th and 1st house and 6th and 7th house are wider. And his 3rd, 4th, 9th, and 10th houses are much thinner. What would account for this? Time of day or year?" Good hint.
Oh.
Thanks so much for your insight and expertise as always. I so appreciate your podcast and Instagram. Have a great day. Well, actually, have a great Wednesday, Bailey. Bailey obviously wrote to me on a Wednesday. So yeah, the answer was in the question, Bailey. This is why it's so important to work with Placidus house system and time of birth. There's a lot of teachers out there teaching something called whole house system, where in order to make the idea of house structure more understandable, the whole thing is dumbed down. And it's faked. It's just, if you're an Aries rising, then your entire 1st house would be Aries. Your entire 2nd house would be Taurus. Your entire 3rd house. Like, it dumbs it down. The reason, Bailey, your partner and your charts are so different is indeed because of not the time of day, but the time of year. So the Earth tilts. And we have people living very high in northern latitudes and very low in southern, right? So depending on where you are on the Earth and what season it is, the Earth will be tilting in certain ways. And then the chart's wideness of houses and thinness of other houses is reflecting the tilt of the Earth and how much of the Earth is sort of being exposed to the sun based on latitude and time of year, seasonality. So if you dumb it down and you create every house as equal with regard to how many degree points it inhabits and what signs rule it, you're so far away from what a real house structure is when you use the Placidus system. Because you might have a house that's only a handful of degrees wide and then another house that's way wider in degree points because of the tilt of the Earth. Well, and here's our next question. Now, unfortunately, I don't have the name of the person who wrote me this question, and I do like to acknowledge who has written it. So I apologize. In my cut and pasting from the email you sent to getting on my outline, the last 2 words of my outline says warm wishes. So whomever wrote this question wished me warmly, but I can't say who it is. So sorry. But this person writes, "Thank you so much for all your teaching and guidance, and especially your podcast and daily alerts. They are so informative and fun to listen to and have helped me to make better choices at times." Yay. I was wondering, what does a person do if they don't have a birth time for their natal chart? I am adopted and have tried multiple avenues to get my birth time to no avail. What do I do? Okay, let me start with a thing called rectification. There are people who specialize in helping choose a time of birth and therefore a rising sign. And it's done by clocking really major life events. And then the astrologer looks at those events and the chart and makes a determination based on the life event and what house setup would probably had to have been in place for the marriage to take place when the person was 25 or, moving across the country at 32, right? Those big life events can be looked at by an astrologer, and that astrologer has done this enough to have a sense of narrowing down. You must be a Libra rising if you got married then and had that surgery at that time in your life. And. Now, if someone comes to me and says, I have a rectified time of birth, I will just do their session with that time of birth, and I will get rid of any thoughts I might have in there that say, oh my God, I don't think I really know the right time, right? Because that's like an annoying way to work, right? You gotta handle this somehow.
Don't you pick noon?
Well, that's where we go next.
Ah.
Like, if you don't have a time of birth and you don't have a rectification, there are two standard ways that an astrologer will work. One is choosing noon, 12 noon, sun's at the zenith. That's what I do. I choose 12 noon because I get the day of the birth, and then I won't put as much emphasis onto the house placements, obviously, because we don't really know what the house placements are if we've made up a random timing. But I do transit astrology. That doesn't impact me as much because I'm really talking about the waves of energy, which you don't need to know the house placements to know if Pluto is squaring your moon or not.
Mhm.
So you lose a little distinction without having the house to speak about. And then because the time of birth establishes the two major angles, the rising sign and the midheaven, the relational point and the sort of work career point, if I know I don't have a time of birth and someone's in a year where there's a big transit to their rising or their midheaven, I can't talk about it because it might be something that's 20 years from now. So there's definitely ways that an astrologer working with a chart can work with transits very powerfully, but adjustments need to be made. There's another technique that a lot of astrologers do that I don't do, which is to cast or choose a time of day that puts the sun in the first house of the chart. Because the first house represents the self, the sun represents the self. And so the astrologer would cast the chart, and it's like, oh, well, if I cast this chart for 3:40 or 3 o'clock, then your Leo's sun is in your first house, and I'll read you that way. I just don't. I'm not attracted to that, so I chose 12 noon because it seemed more organic than this manufactured placement of putting the sun in the first house. But if you've ever read a horoscope out there, kids, and you can look for this from here on in, if you ever read a horoscope that says, hey, Aries, the Venus retrograde falls into your fifth house of love, that person is thinking about that in the terms of putting the sun in the first house. And if you were an Aries sun and that was in the first house, the fifth house of that chart would be Leo. Right? So it's a way to make horoscopes, which is horrible, shitty, awful fucking astrology, not invented by astrologers, but invented by the newspaper industry, and so fucking irrelevant to your astrological experience. It makes sense to me that people would do this, but I just don't choose to work in that way. It feels to me the most potentially accurate to choose 12 noon. Now, to wrap up, though, the question about, like, will you ever get a time of birth or a chart that you can work with that actually creates a rising sign that is true and house placements that are accurate? My answer is no. I mean, you can find somebody who does rectification, and if that speaks to you, go have at it, do that. I would be remiss if I just said I reject that technique out of hand when I've never actually sat down with somebody who does this and queried them.
Mm-hmm.
That would be the thing to do before, like, generating an opinion about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to be really clear about that. I because I've never asked somebody who does this exactly how they do it, I don't deserve to have a completely negating opinion about it. So I'll try not to. And, I was going to say I would never do that, but I also know what time I was born.
And, like, for people who don't, is this something to worry about? I just
No,
feel like
no, no,
that
no,
would
no,
also
no.
be a question.
Not
People
in
are like,
my
"I need to
office.
know," and
Yeah, no, not in my office. If you come to me and you don't know what time you were born, you are not going to get a subpar reading from me. Partly because I don't do the kind of readings like, no one's coming to my office and me saying, well, you're a Scorpio sun, so you're intense, and you're a Libra moon, which offsets that with forgiveness. Like, I don't do that. My joke is like, if you don't know who you are, by the time you get to me, I probably can't help you.
Oh.
I work with people and the transits that they're in the year that we're sitting with, maybe the year before and the year ahead.
Mhm.
And for that kind of work, you don't really need to know what time a person is born. It's easier for me, the astrologer, because I'm not like editing as I go, but you can get a perfectly powerful and valid reading, whether you know your time of birth or not. Well, this week in some ways is all about the inconjunct. My favorite angle in geometry, in astrology, is the 150-degree angle. It has two different names, technical names. One is the inconjunct. One is quincunx, Quincunx. I don't say that word because it's just too many vowels in my mouth.
Such a big word. I love it, though.
It's such a big word. Well, could I live my life over, I might have opted for the quincunx over the inconjunct, but I call it the Great Eliminator. That's my moniker for it. I believe I got that from Stephanie Azaria, who's really the only teacher I ever had formally, and really not. She wasn't a major teacher of mine, but she's the only person I ever called teacher. All of the names that I use, I got from her. Calling Neptune Great Spirit, Great Awakener for Uranus, the Great Transformer. I don't use that for Pluto much, but that's a Stephanie language. And she called this angle the Great Eliminator angle. Now, she didn't make as much hay about it that I do. I have never met any astrologer who's as obsessed with this angle as I am, but there's a very good reason why. We do most of our growing and changing in life slowly, incrementally, by gathering wisdom and making new choices based on something we've just learned or experienced. There are plenty of times where we learn and grow in more revolutionary acts, and there are spiritual awakenings and there are dark nights of the soul, and there are sudden events that change the course of our lives. But those are infrequent compared to the opportunities that we all have to bump into shit we didn't know, have a life lesson, and then make a new choice, like on a Thursday because we had an experience on a Monday that helped us learn something. And that act of incremental new choices based on experiences that instruct us, that's the 150-degree Great Eliminator angle. Of course, depending on the planets involved and the signs that they're in, the language might be very different in terms of what we're like doing and processing with regard to how we make a new choice and leave something behind and move in a new direction. But when the inconjunct is present, the major language is fork in the road, look for the new choice, road less traveled by. All of those tropes are ideas that reflect this notion of you can make a small choice and leave an old pattern behind. And then if in your own chart, if there's like a year with, a bunch of them, there might be lots of growth by making small new changes. And then when the cosmos is doing a whole bunch of inconjuncts, as they are this week, from Wednesday through Friday, there's a bevy of these. And then there's another one from Venus on Sunday that we'll talk about in a separate section of this podcast because it's about Venus's retrograde. So from Wednesday to Friday, if you do nothing else, remember the tropes. Fork in the road, road less traveled by, try something new. Like, you can't go wrong this week ahead if you approach everything with a little bit of curiosity and flexibility. But let's break it down. I'll go day by day, and it starts right in the middle of the week. As we move through Wednesday, Mercury will in conjunct Neptune. So whenever Neptune is involved, something about cloudiness, confusion, things we didn't see clearly before is involved. Mercury, it's going to be about perception, something that we can either speak into or see or perceive that we hadn't been able to before will be part of the middle of this week. So I guess I'm all about the tropes today. The trope of this will be more will be revealed, or shit, I didn't see that coming. That's actually sounded more like Uranus, like something that comes
That's
out.
what I was thinking. I was like, huh,
Right. I
interesting.
love that you thought that too. Yeah. That's a little misleading because that implied that something might happen suddenly out of nowhere, like that knocked you on your ass. And that's not in this transit, but it is in this transit to be like, oh my God, I did not see that. How did I miss that? Right? So look for things that clear up or that you see differently or that are revealed somehow to be more truthful as a result of, like, the fog lifting or taking, here's another trope, it's just all about the tropes today, taking the rose-colored glasses off.
Okay.
All right, so Wednesday it starts with a perception. Now, Thursday perfects the conjunction of Mercury and Venus. So part of what's happening this week is that we are actually getting a bit of an alignment of our feelings and our thoughts. Mercury is the perceiver, but Venus is the one who processes the emotional intelligence that guides us. So when they come together, we enjoy a kind of an alignment of thinking and feeling in the same place, a congruency between our perceptions and our emotional body. That's part of the week. But remember, they're all doing in conjunct. So, tropes, fork in the road less traveled by, try something new, let something go. Also on Thursday, Mercury is trining the north node of the moon. So this throws a little thread into the week of anything that we do see differently or more clearly or let go of or move away from will be folded right into our sense of movement and dharma and destiny. And not for nothing, Thursday will be a day where we're connecting and active with others and in groups and making contact so that if we need to be out and about connecting with others in order to have the experiences that require us to see things new, to fork in the road, to try the new, path, we're going to be connecting with others Thursday in order to have some of those kinds of experiences. Yet another Mercury in conjunct happens on Thursday as well. Mercury will be facing off with Pluto in this 150-degree angle. I'm calling this the look below the hood. Pluto is always about what's below the surface, power and authority, shadow. If Mercury and Pluto are connecting with each other, there's always going to be a little warning of watch your communication. This is a setup for favoring manipulation, passive aggression, going about things sideways to get what you want. Don't do that, kids. That's shitty. So, outside of the warning to sort of make sure that you're operating with all of your integrity, understand that also on Thursday might be conversations that happen with people because we're out and about and connecting with them that require us or create for us some kind of a shift that comes because we understand the power dynamic more accurately. or we bump into the shadowy thing that we have to have a conversation about. Either way, no matter how you slice it, as the week is coming to an end, there's going to be some power struggle to process that's part of all of these inconjuncts. Then on Friday, it just never ends. On Friday, it's the sun inconjuncting Saturn. Now, what I love is it's like the lesson lands, the teacher's in the room. We now get to shift because we have the wisdom that we've been, I don't know if struggling is the right word, but the wisdom that we've been working on expanding and deepening because we're facing the lessons. We finished the week, or at least the weekday week, the Friday portion of the week. We finish with a sense of wisdom we've gathered by what we have been through this, in the days that precede it, should allow for our conscious awareness, the sun, to grab the lessons and then be in a position to make the new choice that all of these inconjuncts are setting us up for. Well, Venus is active this weekend in her retrograde cycle, and guess what? It's an inconjunct. So I'm separating it out from talking about the other ones, but it's all connected. But in some ways, I think the week's experience is leading to Sunday's opportunity because I'm emphasizing that Venus is now retrograde, right? So she turned around just before we started this week. So we are officially in the backward motion. So we want to remember to be looking back at everything that happened in the last couple of weeks before she turned around last weekend, because that certainly gave us all of the information we need to get through what this coming weekend into next week is bringing us, because this is going to be the first time in Venus's backward motion that she's doing the second of one of the triple transits that she's doing, like the first, like air quotes, real work of the Venus retrograde takes place on Sunday, making the whole weekend and into Monday of next week really important with regard to matters of the heart. The transit is, of course, an inconjunct, right? Because it's a week of that. And it's an inconjunct from Venus to Neptune. Now, Venus and Neptune are related in the world of love. Venus is love in the heart, and Neptune is love of the divine. I don't know if this is a trope, but it's a cuteism, right? Venus, L, love, small l, and Neptune, capital L, love.
Oh,
Or
okay.
love is love is love is love.
I'm writing
love.
that one down.
Well, but understand something, Zoe, that in this geometrical relationship, it's not harmonious. Personal love is receiving awareness from transpersonal love that something is changing or different or needs to be walked away from or isn't real. Remember, the inconjunct is always about something that has to go and maybe something new that wants to be experienced. And when Neptune is triggered in any kind of a shadowy way, it's about lack of clarity or delusion or not seeing things clearly. So this is very much a seeing your love experiences for what they really are. What I'm sort of calling this he's just not that into you transit.
Huh.
But you get that. I mean, how many times have we sort of, all of us have, I know you have, Zoe, and I have too, bump into something where it's like love is felt and we chase it and the object of our affection doesn't return it, but we can't see that until we can see that.
Right.
So that's why I'm calling it he's just not that into you. So the first time that this hit was smack dab in the middle of July. The exact date was July 15th. So you want to consider the day or so before the 15th, the day or so after the 15th, and just look for anything that rose up last month that looks like it's in the territory of cloudiness, confusion around love, feeling like maybe you're either not seeing things clearly or being deceived by someone else, right? A lot of
Mm.
relationship complexities happen because we trust untrustable people, or conversely, we can't trust anybody.
Yep.
Right. So no matter how you slice it, this coming weekend is about getting to the nugget of truth in matters of the heart in some way or another. And your hint is mid-July. And if a relationship dynamic is playing out in your narrative, understand that anything that came up in, as spring was becoming summer, is probably going to continue through the next couple of months because we're layering through a process, right? So if something came up last month, it's definitely going to come up again this month, and then again in the wrap up. Like the third time this hits is October 3rd. So while Venus is retrograde, the process is a little more baffling or befuddling. It's an unconscious process because that's my language for when a planet is appearing to move backwards. It's as if it's in our unconscious spaces. So as a result, the ahas you get over this weekend and into early next week may come through reading the unconscious impulse after the fact. That's when you say something that we might have called a Freudian slip in the old days and be like, "Ooh, shit, I didn't know I felt that way." It's like you're about to say pass the salt and out of your mouth flies, "Why'd you ruin my life?" Right? So look for hints from last month of things you need to sort of feel differently about or let go of or see clearly or get to the bottom of, and understand that we're moving through a similar energy this weekend, and we will wrap it up again just as sort of September is becoming October. And I believe that the way in which from Wednesday through Sunday, we begin having all of these inconjuncts, the whole week, certainly starting Tuesday and Wednesday, leads up to what I think is the important fork in the road, which is the one that's driven by Venus's retrograde cycle that hits on Sunday, where we're going to move in a new direction because hopefully we're seeing something more clearly, or our feelings are leading us to an awareness that we needed to definitively say, that goes, I'm moving towards that, have at it.
Did you know that Michael has a daily astro alert? If you enjoy hearing the weekly astrology, you might like knowing more about each day. When you subscribe for the daily astro alerts, you'll get an in-depth explanation of the day's astrology sent right to your email. Subscriptions are only $10 a month, or you can purchase the yearly subscription at the reduced price of $100. To subscribe, head over to michaellennox.com. All right, it's dream segment time. Every week, Dr. Michael will interpret dreams that are sent in via email or take a live caller. If you would like your dream interpreted on the podcast, you can go ahead and email us at dreams@michaellennox.com. Hopefully your dream will make it onto the show. This week we have an email in dream from Amanda Olafson.
Oh.
I don't know if that's coming from Scandinavia or it's just a Scandinavian
It's a Scandinavian
last
name. I know Amanda. Yeah, she's an American gal with a Scandinavian name. Hey, Amanda, thanks for sending in a dream.
Okay, so Amanda says, I'm really enjoying your podcast. Thanks for putting it out into the world. Audio is my ideal medium for consuming content because I struggle to read everything.
Ooh,
So
love
thank
that.
you.
You're welcome, Amanda.
Here's her dream. I was in a library between tall bookshelves and heard some scurrying above. There were some rodents, which at first I wasn't sure what they were, but they were rats. Two brown rats peeking out from behind a bookend from the highest shelf. I was with someone else, I'm not sure who was very alarmed that there were rats. I wasn't alarmed, neutral emotions. Then, instead of looking up at the rats from standing on the floor, I was looking down on them like I was above them. They were really skinny, maybe malnourished, to a point that I doubt if they were rats, but they definitely were. Then they started doing synchronized yoga, a warrior two, and then a child's pose.
I've been
Best
waiting for
Amanda.
the dreamy dream thing to come. So wait a minute. Synchronized yoga. Okay.
And that's a warrior two and a child's pose.
Okay. Warrior 2 and child's pose. Interesting. Oh my God, what a dream, Amanda. You've made my day. Really? I'm not like, you're telling me the brown rats in the library. I'm going like, blah, 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 blah. Dream, dream, dream. I kind of know where I'm going to go with it, but
And then they do
they
yoga.
do synchronized yoga. I love this dream. So let's start with library, right? So if we're in a library, we're in consideration of thought, wisdom, knowledge. We're probably also in the world of knowledge that is old and generational and historical, right? Not your personal knowledge, but the knowledge that's available to all of humanity, right? So wisdom about how life works and the world itself might be, well described by a dream in a library. We're in what's the wisdom, what's the intelligence got to say about life. Rats are interesting because they're a shadow, animal medicine in a way, because they are creepy and they are hidden, right? They're not visible to us, and they live in places that we would not like to go. Like they live in the sewer, they live below. So we have an association of rats connecting to disease, pestilence, dirtiness, sewage. So as an image, then they have to connect to shadow material that we keep out of sight, but that's like right there, part of us, right? It's not like some distant sewer,
Mhm.
The rat consciousness is right there, available to us, reminding us that we always have some hidden, pesky, things that need our attention in the world of like shadow, paying attention to things we'd rather not look at. Not that rats wouldn't make a lovely pet, and some people keep them as pets, and they can be quite clean. My mother worked at a laboratory, when I was a kid, and so she would always talk with rats are really very clean. It's like, yeah, but not the ones in the fucking sewer, and not the ones
No.
in Amanda's dream either, right? So I think
No.
it'll be pretty obvious to anybody that the rats in the dream reflect some kind of shadow, pesky, typically hidden stuff that Amanda needs to look at that might be interfering with her having a more direct connection to wisdom and her own sense of, resources of intelligence. So at the beginning of the dream, the rats are above. And so we've established that's sort of a power position. They have more dominance when they're above. It's interesting to me, though, that they peek out. She says they peek out. Well, that tells me that the psyche of the shadow in the dream is wanting to be known, right? So they're making themselves known to Amanda by peeking out from above. And what's wonderful is that she's neutral about that, which means the witness of her, the center of Amanda, is not flipped out about this shadow material that needs her attention. But there's an aspect of self that is, right? There's somebody that she doesn't know who's very alarmed at the presence of the rats. So for my money, that's good. That's good news, because the person in the dream is part of Amanda, but it's part of her that isn't known, that isn't integrated, that maybe doesn't even need to be. It's the part that remembers what it is to be terrified of shadow work.
Yeah.
Now, the reason I can say that I don't think this part of her needs attention for me is because of what happens in the dream next, right? We establish that there's a part of her that is not wise and not, evolved in the work of shadow work. But the dream then somehow shifts the perspective. Now Amanda is in the one-up position, looking down at the scene. That puts her in a power place. And what does she notice? The rats are emaciated. They're undernourished. Well, they're undernourished. That means they haven't been fed for a while. I think that indicates news that there's growth having been done because the shadowy, pesky thoughts and thought forms and emotional constructs that rats might represent as a symbol are actually underfed, malnourished, and not that strong. When she looks at the situation from a higher vantage point. If she's down below, she's got a part of herself that she's not all that connected to. I don't know who this part is. She doesn't know them, but that part's very alarmed. So that tells us that it's possible for Amanda to still be overwhelmed by things she'd rather not look at. But if she takes the higher vantage point and looks from above, she sees that these rats are not strong and vibrant. She even says, I doubt they eat. Did she say something like that? Can't read my notes.
No. To the point where she doubted if they were rats, but they were definitely rats.
Got it. So there's been enough starving out of the rat consciousness that is like, well, maybe it's all gone. They're not even rats. It's like, oh, no, those are rats. Those are yucky thoughts I've not been feeding. So to me, the dream is a good news dream. The dream is about I've come to a place where I'm aware of how much work I've done. Because what's really interesting is that there are two poses that these rats do. And one of them suggests, now, we're in shadow, right? We're in shadow because they are rats. They're not yoga teachers. So then we have to look at the yoga poses they do as an expression of shadow. One of them is warrior. That, to me, is fighting fights that are not your fight to fight. That's the shadow of warrior, which is I divide everything into right and wrong, and I declare that right, that wrong, and that isn't the thing to do unless you need to figure out what's right and wrong outside of when that's needed. Being the warrior could be, certainly the way this dream is presenting it to me, the warrior pose that the rats are doing is, hey, Amanda, remember when we used to fight every fight that came our way? And what's child's pose? Child's pose is just that when we're like, this is too fucking hard. I'm going to lie on my front like a child and just stop. It's one of the most restorative poses in yoga. It's yummy.
Very restful.
Yes, it's a restful, lovely pose to do. But in the dream, the way I'm seeing it, I want to look at what the rats are showing Amanda as expressions of old shadow patterns that we know are diminishing because the rats are dying off from malnutrition, but they used to, in synchronicity or synchronization, fight the fights, warrior pose, or avoid life and movement by slipping into child's pose. They're both shadowy poses, especially when we think of warrior as, fighting a fight that's not yours, and child's pose being you not fighting anything, but like retreating. So for me, this is a beautiful assessment of shadow, noting that Amanda still has some. They're still there. Are they rats? Yes, they are. But when she has a higher vantage point, she can see how far she's come.
Thank you for listening to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. You can find us on Apple Music, the iHeartRadio app, and anywhere you find your favorite shows. Head on over to michaellennox.com for information on astrology readings, the Daily Astro Alert subscription, upcoming classes, and to join the mailing list.